The handwritten log was still open on the passenger seat when Nora Halstead didn't come home. On the afternoon of August 22, 1990, in the flat farm country south of Millhaven, Iowa, population 2,600, a Tuesday in late summer had arrived the way late summer Tuesdays arrived in that part of the state, heavy with heat and the smell of cut corn, and the particular stillness of a landscape that has been doing what it does for so long that it no longer needs to announce itself. At 3:47 p.m., the County Road Department foreman, Earl Tanner, had passed Nora's white county truck parked on the gravel shoulder of Route 23 outside the Hendricks family farm, and had raised a hand as he went by, assuming she was inside visiting. He didn't stop. He had his own route to run. What happened between that raised hand and the moment Nora's 12-year-old daughter, Caitlin, sat down to dinner at an empty table 4 hours later would define both of their lives for the next 34 years. But before we get to how it ended, you have to understand who Nora Halstead was. Because to understand what Caitlin fought for, you first have to understand what she lost. Millhaven sat in the center of the county, surrounded by the kind of landscape that people who grew up there could close their eyes and reconstruct from memory. The grain elevator rising at the edge of town like a white tower. The co-op lot where farmers parked their trucks and talked while the radio played from inside. The smell of the weekly livestock sale that drifted through the east side of town on Thursdays, regardless of the wind direction. By 1990, the farm economy that had nearly broken this part of Iowa a decade earlier had stabilized. But the memory of what the 80s had cost was still fresh. Farms lost, families scattered, men who had farmed the same ground their grandfathers broke now working at the plastics plant in the next county over. The county extension office was where people came when they needed help, which meant it was where Nora spent most of her days. She drove the back roads in the white county truck. She knew every farm family by name. The Blockbuster video rental store had opened on the main road the previous spring and had a waiting list for new releases. But most of the county's social life still ran through the Farm Bureau meetings and the 4-H club and the county fair and the kind of supper table hospitality that didn't require an occasion. Nora Halstead was 42 years old in the summer of 1990. She had worked as a county agricultural extension agent for 11 years. The kind of public servant who understood that her job was not to provide information, but to provide trust. And that trust was built one farm visit at a time. She drove an average of 300 miles a week through the county, stopping at operations ranging from 2 acres to 2,000. And she knew the people behind every mailbox on every road she traveled. She kept a handwritten log in a green spiral-bound notebook, not the official visit records required by the state office, but a personal one, a second account in her own hand with a line or two for each family, who had a new grandchild, who had dealt with a hard season, who needed a follow-up call she intended to make. Her supervisor had asked her once why she kept it. She said she kept it because she was afraid of forgetting people. She had a daughter named Caitlin, who was 12 years old that summer, and who had inherited her mother's precision, the same attention to detail, the same instinct that a thing worth doing was worth doing thoroughly. They had a ritual on Sunday evenings. Nora would cook. Caitlin would set the table, and they would sit together for the meal, and Nora would tell Caitlin 2 things she had learned that week, because she believed that knowing things was a form of protection. She had been a widow for 4 years, since Caitlin's father had died of a heart attack in 1986. They were a household of 2. They were each other's fixed point. That Sunday the week before would be the last time they sat at that table together. In 2 days, nothing would be the same. Nora had been scheduled to visit 3 farms on the afternoon of August 22nd. The first 2 were completed. The county records show her log-in times at each location, both confirmed by the families she visited. The third stop, the Hendricks farm on Route 23, was the last entry in her official log. Her arrival time was noted. There was no departure time. Earl Tanner passed the white truck on the shoulder at 3:47 p.m. and raised his hand and kept driving. At 4:30, the Hendricks family told investigators later they had finished their conversation with Nora and watched her walk back out to her truck, which was parked on the road rather than in the lane. She had said she was just stopping briefly. At 4:30, she got into the truck. At 4:31, she was gone from their view. The White County truck was found at 6:22 p.m. That same evening, pulled over on a secondary road off County Road G that dead-ended at an abandoned grain bin site. Engine off. The green spiral-bound log was open on the passenger seat to the page dated August 22nd. 3 farms were listed. The third entry had a start time and no end time. Her keys were in her purse on the floor. Her purse was in the truck. Nora was not. Caitlin was 12 years old. She had set the table. She sat there until the food was cold. Nora's body was found 2 days later, on August 24th, in a drainage ditch at the edge of a cornfield off County Road M, 7 miles from where the truck had been left. She was 42 years old. She had a daughter who needed her. She was gone. The Millhaven Police Department called in the Hardin County Sheriff's Office immediately. Lead investigator assigned was Detective Louise Sager, a 9-year veteran who drove a county Caprice with a child's drawing taped to the dashboard, her own daughter's, that had been there for 3 years and that she had never taken down because she said it kept her honest. Sager understood from the first hours that this was not a random crime. The secondary road to the grain bin site was not a road you found by accident. It was the kind of road you knew because you worked the land around it, or because someone had told you it was there. She built her suspect framework around the network of farms Nora serviced, the roughly 40 families in the southern part of the county whose extension agent she had been. Within the first 2 weeks, one name emerged above the others. A man named Dale Brecken, who farmed 640 acres off Route 23, less than 3 miles from the grain bin site. Brecken was 51 years old, widowed, and had been a client of the Extension Office for 8 years. His farm was not on Nora's August 22nd schedule, but records from the Extension Office showed he had placed a call to the county office 2 days before asking when his next scheduled visit would be. He had also, according to 2 neighboring farm families, spoken about Nora in ways that had struck them as out of proportion to a professional relationship, complimentary in a manner that had a quality to it that neither family could articulate precisely, but that both remembered clearly enough to mention it, unprompted, when Sager knocked on their doors. Sager interviewed Brecken on August 31st. He was cooperative and unhurried, and had an account of his afternoon of August 22nd that was partially corroborated by a receipt from the farm supply store in the next town, and partially reliant on his own word. The gap in his timeline was 90 minutes, not enough to charge him. Enough that Sager wrote his name at the top of her list and circled it. She submitted a request for forensic analysis of a fiber sample recovered from the exterior of Nora's truck. The lab result came back: common agricultural fiber, non-specific. It could have come from any farm in the county. The institutional failure was not a single decision. It was a series of them, each one reasonable in isolation, each one a step further from Dale Brecken's name at the top of Sager's list. The county attorney's office reviewed the file in October of 1990 and declined to pursue a charge. Insufficient evidence, no physical link, no witness to place Brecken near the scene. Sager submitted a request for a more comprehensive forensic review of the truck's interior in early 1991. The request was approved, but deprioritized. The analysis was completed in March and yielded nothing new. By the summer of 1991, a second line of inquiry had opened around a transient laborer who had been working seasonal harvest jobs in the county that August. Sager ran him for 6 months. The alibi held. By the time she closed that line, the Brecken file had cooled in a way that she could feel but could not reverse. She kept it open. She watched it sit. Caitlin was 12 years old in 1990, and 13 in 1991, and 14 when she began asking questions that no one in the county attorney's office wanted to answer. And 15 when she understood for the first time that the system was not going to move on its own schedule. That if it moved, something was going to have to push it. She moved in with her mother's sister in Millhaven, a woman named Pat, who was quiet and steady, and who raised Caitlin the way Ruth Pickett had raised Owen, the way Frances Birch had raised Macy, with the love that steps into the space left by the one who is gone, and does not ask for credit, and does not stop. Pat took Caitlin to the county fair every August, the same fair Nora had taken her to. They sat in the same spot in the bleachers. They ate the same things. It was the only ritual Caitlin kept that was exactly as it had been before, because she understood, at an age when most people do not understand such things, that some rituals are acts of resistance. By 1997, 7 years on, Caitlin was 19 and a freshman at the University of Iowa, studying criminal justice, a choice she did not explain to anyone because she did not feel it required explanation. She kept a copy of her mother's case file in her dorm room. She had obtained it through a public records request she had submitted herself. On official letterhead she had drafted herself, at the age of 16. By 2002, 12 years after August 22nd, she had graduated, worked 2 years at a law firm in Des Moines, and submitted her first formal petition to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, requesting a cold case review of her mother's file. The DC acknowledged receipt. They conducted an internal review. They wrote back that the original investigation had been thorough and that no new evidence had emerged to warrant reopening. Caitlin filed the response in a binder that was growing thick. By 2008, 18 years after the white truck was found on the secondary road, Dale Brecken had retired from farming and was living in a smaller house in Millhaven. He attended the same Lutheran church he had attended for 30 years. He had a boat he took out on the county reservoir on summer mornings. Caitlin, 30 years old now, working as a victim's advocate in Des Moines, submitted her second formal petition to the DCI. This time, accompanied by a 17-page brief she had written herself detailing the evidentiary gaps in the 1990 investigation, citing specific advances in forensic technology that had not been available at the time, and naming Dale Brecken explicitly as a subject whose timeline had never been fully accounted for. The DCI reviewed it. They wrote back that they had no new evidence to justify allocating resources to a reinvestigation. Caitlin filed the response in the binder. By 2011, 21 years after August 22, 1990, the grain elevator at the edge of Millhaven had been sold and repainted by new owners. The same elevator Nora had driven past 300 times a year on her county routes. The co-op lot had been converted to a feed supply franchise. The Blockbuster on the main road had closed the year before, the windows papered over, a handmade sign in the door thanking the community for 30 years of business. The landscape that Nora had known intimately was the same and not the same, the way all landscapes are after 20 years, recognizable in its bones, altered in its skin. Dale Brecken still attended the Lutheran church. He still took the boat out on summer mornings. His name had appeared in the Millhaven Courier 3 times that year. twice in connection with a local historical preservation project, and once in a list of longtime members of the Hardin County Farm Bureau. Caitlin had read all 3 notices. She kept them in the binder. By 2014, 24 years on, she had submitted 3 more petitions, contacted 2 investigative journalists who had written follow-up pieces that generated local attention and then faded, and appeared twice before the Hardin County Board of Supervisors to request funding for an independent forensic review. The first request was tabled. The second was denied on budget grounds. The binder was now 4 inches thick. Pat, who had developed a heart condition, told Caitlin during a phone call that year that she didn't know how she kept going. Caitlin said she kept going because stopping would mean accepting that the answer was no, and she didn't believe the answer was no. She believed the answer was waiting for the right question. Every case on this channel takes weeks of work, records requests, verification, trying to honor the people at the center of it. If this kind of work matters to you, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to Nora. In 2022, 32 years after August 22, 1990, Caitlin Halstead was 44 years old. She had been told no by the Iowa DCI 4 times, by the county attorney's office twice, by 2 different state legislators who had been sympathetic but non-committal, and by a forensic review board that had prioritized other cases ahead of hers in 2 consecutive budget cycles. She had not stopped. That year, using personal savings and a fundraising effort organized through a victim advocacy network she had built over a decade of professional work, she contracted a private forensic genealogist, a woman named Diane Eckert, who had worked on 17 cold cases in 7 states, and provided her with the biological evidence samples that had been retained in the Hardin County Evidence Archive since 1990. There were 2, a trace sample recovered from Nora's uniform, and a second sample from the truck's interior door panel that had been collected on a preserve-everything basis and never fully analyzed because 1990 technology hadn't been able to extract a profile from it. Eckert worked for 11 weeks. She was able to build a partial DNA profile from the door panel sample, incomplete by courtroom standards, but complete enough for genealogical comparison. She uploaded it to a public ancestry database. The database returned a cluster of partial matches pointing toward a family in central Iowa. Eckert built the tree. She narrowed it to a man in his early 80s living in Millhaven. She called Caitlin on a Thursday evening in April of 2023. Caitlin already knew the name. She had known it for 33 years. When Eckert's findings were presented to the Iowa DCI Cold Case Unit the following week, accompanied by a formal report and a chain of custody documentation package that Caitlin had helped Eckert prepare, the unit was legally obligated to act. A court-authorized DNA sample was obtained from Dale Brecken within 30 days. The Iowa DCI laboratory confirmed the match to the trace evidence from Nora Halstead's uniform at a statistical certainty exceeding 99.6%. Records show that the arrest warrant was signed on June 14, 2023. Caitlin was at her desk in Des Moines when her phone rang. The detective who called her was a woman who had been assigned to the case for the final push, a DCI agent named Renata Voss, who had read every petition Caitlin had ever filed. She said, "We have a warrant." Caitlin didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "How long until the arrest?" 48 hours, Voss said. "I'll be there." Dale Brecken was arrested at his home in Millhaven on the morning of June 16, 2023. He was 84 years old. Officers arrived at 7:00 a.m. He answered the door himself, in a cardigan and slippers, and he looked at the officers on his step and then passed them to the driveway, where a car was parked at the curb. Caitlin Halstead was standing beside it. She had driven from Des Moines at 4 in the morning to be there. She had told herself she just needed to see it. Brecken looked at her for a moment before the officers read the charge. He said nothing. He was helped into the patrol car carefully, given his age. The door closed. The car pulled away. Caitlin stood at the curb in the June morning for a long time without moving. The reaction in Millhaven was the grief-edged stillness that comes to small communities when a name they have known for decades turns out to mean something they never prepared for. The Lutheran Church held a private prayer service that Sunday. A woman who had known Nora Halstead from the Extension office posted a brief tribute online. A photograph of Nora at the county fair in 1988, laughing at something outside the frame, her green spiral-bound notebook tucked under one arm. Dozens of people in the county who had been Nora's clients shared it without adding words, because there were no words adequate to the gap between that photograph and what had spent 33 years living 4 streets away from where it was taken. In February of 2024, following a trial that lasted 8 days, Dale Brecken was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. He was 85 years old at sentencing. He made no statement to the court. According to court documents, he appeared to read something on the table in front of him during the verdict and did not look up when his sentence was announced. Caitlin was in the front row. She had brought the 4-inch binder, every petition, every denial, every letter, every piece of correspondence from 34 years of asking, and she set it on the seat beside her when she sat down and did not open it. She didn't need it anymore. The record existed. It had always existed. She had simply refused to let anyone forget it was there. Nora Halstead drove 300 miles of Iowa back roads every week to remember the names of people who might otherwise be forgotten. She kept a second log because the official one didn't feel like enough. She was 42 years old, and she had a daughter who set the table on Sunday evenings and waited for her to come home. And she didn't come home. And that daughter spent the next 34 years doing for her mother exactly what her mother had done for everyone else, making sure she was not forgotten, making sure her name stayed present, making sure the record was kept. There is something in this story that goes beyond justice, or alongside it, the idea that love, when it has nowhere else to go, becomes evidence. Caitlin Halstead did not solve this case because she had forensic training or law enforcement resources or institutional authority. She solved it because she paid for it herself, built the case file herself, and refused 34 years of no. She became, finally, the thing her mother had always believed in, the person who shows up, who keeps the record, who does not allow forgetting to masquerade as closure. What does it say that it took a daughter's private funds and a privately contracted genealogist to force a result that 4 rounds of official petitions could not? Do you believe Caitlin's decision to stand at the curb that June morning was about witnessing justice, or something more personal than that? And what do you think Nora Halstead would have said if she could have seen her 12-year-old daughter become the person who finally closed this case? Justice came for Nora Halstead after 34 years. Her daughter carried it to the door herself. If you believe that kind of love deserves to be witnessed, subscribe so you never miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.